why we believe communities are so incredibly powerful. It's because we learn with other people best, right? We have that support, we get that feedback, we get the opportunity to belong and be seen. It's just a very different experience when you learn with other people.
Welcome to the Community Unlocked podcast hosted by Helena and Olena, where we have in-depth conversations with top-tier community leaders and growth experts. Our goal is to provide you with concrete and actionable advice to help you learn about building, launching, and growing your community. Today, our guest is Candice Factor, co-founder and co-CEO of Disco, a leading platform for transformational learning. Candice helped scale Wattpad as global general manager and head of business, leading it to its $660 million sale. She is also a venture partner at Lobby Capital, focusing on enterprise and consumer tech. Previously, she built a corporate innovation arm for a major Canadian media company and started her career at Monitor, a strategy consulting firm. Candice is a frequent speaker on the future of work, transformative learning, and the innovation economy. Candice, hi. Thanks so much for coming to the podcast today. We're really excited to chat to you. How are you?
I'm great. It's so nice to be here.
We know that you have a very interesting background, a very rich background, and I'm sure it can inspire a lot of people. It definitely has inspired me just looking through it. So would you mind telling us a bit more about your journey into this whole world of community?
For sure. I often say, there's two things I love in life that are just constant. One, human connection. I'm one of those people who I really love meeting other people and connecting and lifelong learning. And, I'm one of those people, for good or for bad, I'm just super curious. And, I just think so much about how so many amazing opportunities in my life haven't come from this very straight path, but rather from being in community and being with other people and being open to what those communities and those connections have, opened up. And so, I think because I have this passion for being curious and connecting with people, I really have designed so much of my life to focus on those two topics. But I think this started, back a long time ago, which was I'm an immigrant to Canada. And, I came at a really tough age. I was 14. And when you're 14, people are not super open and inviting. And my parents really didn't know very many people at all in the country. And I think maybe it was because of the lack of community that I sort of made it my goal, to really find community. And something, a wise professor once said is you become the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I'm sure you've heard that. And also who you have access to and what you have exposure to has a significant impact on your life. And, I think that's kind of maybe more the principles of why community matters so much to me is I think we're all human beings and people want a sense of belonging and they want to find their people. And when you do, pretty amazing things can happen, both intentional things and also serendipitous things. In terms of my journey through communities, I don't really know where to start other than to say, I started my career in strategy consulting. I went to business school, and actually it was a phenomenal community in many ways. It was a bunch of really curious people who got to work on really interesting problems in the world. And I really felt a sense of community doing that job. And from there, I got really curious and decided I wanted to explore a lot more around disruptive innovation and sort of creating the future. And, I'm a big believer in that the future is ours to create. And so I spent a lot of time working with a community of people who were very interested in innovation and disruptive innovation. And then I helped build a digital, this is like, I'm just aging myself dramatically here. But in the days when media companies were big companies, I built I was really interested in disruptive innovation and creating the future. And I got this very unique opportunity to go and start a new venture arm for a big media company. And I think I was like 25. God knows why the CEO gave me this opportunity, but it was truly an amazing experience to work with this media company and say, how can we actually use the assets of this media company to build net new digital businesses? And so, that was really interesting to me. We built and acquired and invested in about 21 businesses in 7 years. And it was just like a rocket ship. It was really amazing. I really realized that I wanted to join a startup that wasn't fighting, internally for things, but was actually sort of hyper focused on winning in the market. And what was so interesting was that there was a startup that was doing community-based reading and writing. And it was the startup called Wattpad. It was a very misunderstood startup. In fact, when I joined the startup, the day I joined, there was a big media article saying the pirates of the publishing industry. And really what it was a bunch of young women who were in community with each other, reading and writing stories that they cared about. And I, had this privilege of spending many years helping scale a true network effect global marketplace of readers and writers creating stories. And, Wattpad landed up, I think when I joined, it was like less than 4 million people. And I was like, it was a tiny team. I was employee number 9, and we grew it to 120 million users around the world. And the reason it grew was because there was true network effects. It got better because more people were there. And what was interesting to me around community was community happens when the value of others make the experience better. And what I got really interested in was, wow, look what I learned in this sort of very interesting culture meets technology meets, network effect company. But at the end of the day, the monetization model was advertising, and it was very much a recreational, it was really an escape, right? To read and write these stories with other young women. And I just thought to myself, like, when I think about what I'm passionate about, I actually want people to get as much joy from learning. And, for me, the best learning experiences were not the most formal learning experiences. For me, learning happens in community, right? It happens in less structured, more real sharing with others around our experiences. And so I've always loved peer-based learning. And I also believe that learning happens in projects, like when we actually get to work with other people. And so it was really in the pandemic that I saw this huge opportunity to start my own community, which I did. And, quickly we had like 3,000 people all connecting with each other, thinking about how do we thrive in these times of uncertainty and how do we create the future we want. And I started building this and realized, like, it's actually really painful and hard to build community right now on the internet. It's like you got to piece together so many different tools. Nothing talks to each other. It's so much work. It's wonderful, but there's a lot of broken pieces. Like, how can we build a platform that can fix this? So that's kind of my journey into how we started building Disco.
It's so interesting. Community happens when value of others makes
experience better. This is fantastic.
Yeah, really nice. Really resonates with me, and as I understand you too, Olena. Wattpad It's really interesting how it started and how it developed in this whole creator-based platform that I've never heard about, but I would definitely need to look it up and properly research it. Because
any teen girl, and they'll tell you about Wattpad. It was really popular with teenage girls, which is kind of fun. And you know, it's interesting. Like a disco, a lot of people ask us, like, why did you name your platform disco? That's kind of weird. And I was like, well, actually, it's not, in the sense that in Latin, disco is the root word for learning. And what's interesting about that to me is that disco is actually the root word for discussion and discourse and discovery. And I think if you go back, like I'm a big philosophy, nerd, I guess. And if you just go back to the old Greek philosophers or Aristotle, that like the idea of learning was much more being in conversation with, right, as opposed to being taught at. And so that's really the ethos for why we believe communities are so incredibly powerful. It's because we learn with other people best, right? We have that support, we get that feedback, we get the opportunity to belong and be seen. It's just a very different experience when you learn with other people.
Absolutely. And what you said about philosophy, I studied philosophy as well at university, quite in depth. So I could really understand and kind of think back to that time. And it's something else. But the university I went to, we had problem-based learning, which meant that as a group, we would decide what questions and what problems we will tackle in each session. And we would all get together, and everyone would have a chance to contribute, and it could be whatever. And there was one person who kind of moderated it, which is interesting that I'm thinking about it now, but it sounds a bit like what you're saying in a digital format.
Exactly. And it's interesting. Like we started, with disco. Our journey is like, it's an interesting journey, right? Like we started with cohort based programs because it was really interesting. Like most of the learning that was happening online was happening at people, right? Like I would consume a course, right? I would go through a self-paced course and nobody finishes those things because it's just not how we learn, right? But it was this moment in COVID where we're all stuck at home and like we had no other choice but to be with people. And, the idea that you could do something with a cohort of people was quite new for many folks. And there was a lot of bad experiences that were happening. But what it also did was it made a behavior that was not the norm become actually the norm, right? Like we haven't gone back, right? The Zoomification of our worlds, even though we get fatigued in some ways, like disruptive innovation happens when it like is faster, cheaper, and better. And if you think about it, the idea of bringing people together in real life, there's nothing better, right? Like I love humans. I can't wait to hopefully meet the two of you one day. But what's interesting to me is that it's actually 80% as good. Like it's not 100% as good, but it's 80% as good. And this doesn't cost us anything. Like this would cost us, you're in Amsterdam, I'm in Toronto, it would cost us like thousands of dollars to have this in real life. And, it's also accessibility. Like I have 2 kids, right? And my mom has been in hospital. Like I couldn't even come and meet you, right? So I think that's this big shift around communities online is that, in real life is awesome, but it's more accessible, more affordable, and more sustainable. And so that's why we're seeing the proliferation of, communities on the internet in a new way, right? Like communities existed on the internet before, but there were much more forums, right? It was like text-based forums. And now the modalities and the mediums are becoming so much more aligned with human connection.
Absolutely. And speaking about disco,
Yeah.
I was looking at that, and we looked at an interview with you, someone asking you about revenue very strictly, but there are a few things that I picked from there, and it was interesting. So the way we understand how disco works, and correct us if we're wrong and if things have changed since, is people create learning communities and use disco as a platform, and there are different ways that they can subscribe, and different an enterprise plan, I can't remember, so different ones. And so basically I can decide I want to create a philosophy learning community, and I can subscribe to disco and then start building from there. Is that the way it is?
Absolutely. And what was very important to me was that knowledgepreneurs, as I like to call people in the space, and that could be organizations, it could be businesses, it could be, individuals, but you deserve to own your community. And I think a big theme is like, yes, there's been, Facebook groups forever and LinkedIn groups and, and TikTok, you can have followers, but you don't own those people. Like, you actually do not own that experience on these other platforms. And so it's very important to me, even on Wattpad, you didn't own ultimately your audience, like, and your platform. This is your space, right? People love disco because it's incredibly beautiful. It's like what we call like the home for your community to learn together. And it's beautiful and it's intuitive and it's customizable and it's modular. So you get to design it. And what's interesting is, while we started very much in the learning space, where we brought community elements into your learning program, we actually now have the reverse. Like, the community is the home, and you can put your learning programs in the community. And we think that is like really, really important, that, as you say, companies and businesses and knowledgepreneurs get to design a beautiful space. And our job is to make running and managing a highly engaging community that is thriving as easy as possible. And that's where we can go into a lot more detail why this moment for community management is so interesting to me, because of all the generative AI now that can take a lot of the tactical work that used to take me forever when I was running my community. It's like down to minutes from hundreds of hours. And so our platform is, very focused on making it a very efficient home for your community as well.
If I follow up, could I say that it's kind of a creator platform? Would you say that
No, we started on the creator side, but really where we found the most fit is for businesses. So there's lots of creators out there and they're amazing. And we started in that world. But what we realized is communities and, learning programs, some creators like using them, but really the organizations that we've found the most product fit with are customer communities, our accelerators and incubators, our virtual academies. Like, we run a phenomenal amount of incredible virtual academies that have both the learning programs and the community. And even, member-based businesses or collectives or associations, right? So we're more upscale, I guess, in terms of like who we go after. More, it's just a choice. But that's really, we have a very powerful platform to create the community and the learning programs that you're looking for. So creators sometimes like this, and we have a smaller plan, but that's not our main audience for disco.
Mm-hmm. And you touched a lot of interesting things about like better learning experience and peer-based learning. And I remember that I have very similar part of my career journey to you. So I also worked in venture arm, but as a venture architect, and it was in kids space, and it was in Denmark in Lego incubation studio. And what is interesting, actually, kids, they learn also by play. So basically, they play with each other, they learn from each other. And I think it's so many similarities, like what you are bringing to adult world, like basically what we have as a children, just naturally from the beginning, that we learn by play. And um, I have a question to you regarding the future of education. So I'm very curious to know, like, in the future, how you envision the education part transformed, and also not only for adults, but also for kids. Will it be peer-based, traditional, mixture? Tell us more.
I love it. It's actually really interesting. When I left Wattpad, the idea I had was something called Future School, which was designed for kids. And it was actually very much aligned with what are the skills that young people are going to need to actually thrive in this very uncertain future. And so I spent a tremendous amount of time considering building physical schools for young people to learn the skills I believed were going to be most important. And what are some of those skills? Curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, and ultimately, like, this idea of agency, right? Like, I think we lived in a very structured world, right, where you had to like get permission to do many things. And I think in a new state, you need a lot more agency, right, and the skills to be much more entrepreneurial. So I decided, it's very interesting because I felt that physical spaces for young people are really important. And it's certainly at the time, like, we didn't have technologies like disco, and it hadn't become the norm. But even for kids today, I think physical play is super important in development. But what I did do was I built a program called Get Curious Now, which was an 8-week cohort-based program that actually ran in person in Toronto for young kids to take an idea that they had, or to just get passionate about anything, like to get curious and passionate about something they cared about, and then to go through like the stages of like bringing that to life and to market. And so the most beautiful projects, were built. Like, one was a slime company that was for endangered species. Another one was sugar-free candies. Another one was like dream journals. Like, it was just the most delightful and delicious play-based creativity. And it was really like why disco happened. I don't know if this resonates with you, but I think when you allow yourself to play, you plant seeds in all of these different parts of your brain and in your life and in your networks. And then one day, like, something shows up and you're able to pattern match. And so what was so interesting to me about having done that is it was an impossible business to scale because it was very local. But what I had realized is, like, if we had disco, I could have scaled this business into, a very thriving small business or big business. And so it was actually like, because I had played with the idea of cohort-based courses and played with the idea of like future school, that I got so clear that like this was the moment to do disco when it showed up. So I'm answering your question in a very indirect way, but I think, if you ask, like, if I'm more like on point, like, what do I think the future of education is for young people and old people? I think one thing we're very passionate about is that there is a role for institutions, but that is not the universe of where learning happens. Mm-hmm. And more people are going to learn outside of the institutional frameworks. And they're going to need to do that. And a big theme that, we think a lot about at Disco is the world is actually changing faster and faster. Like, it's not It doesn't seem like it. It actually is, because the speed at which a chaotic system kind of changes is much faster now. And so what that means is that you have to learn so many more things in your adult life. Like you can't just go to school, learn something, and then sort of spend the next 20 years leveraging that piece of knowledge. It's like you've got to learn new things all the time, right? So it's like, I have to learn generative AI this week, and then I have to learn about climate change next week, and then I have to learn about geopolitics the week after. And the best way to do that is with, small groups of people and experts that are accessible and affordable and sustainable in a global context out of the system. And so this idea that just like Shopify helped all of these niche commerce brands, build their empires or businesses, we see the same at Disco. You name it, we have a community that is building in an area that's interesting, from generative AI communities to climate communities to DEI communities. These are businesses that are sort of taking knowledge and bringing communities together so that people can learn new skills for the future.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I can imagine, for me, it means that basically every knowledge worker at certain career journey can be a community owner, like the person who is able to share experience and interested to share this experience with other people, but also learn from other people, is basically can be a creator, but also a participant in other communities. The power of this is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that you get as excited, I can tell, about it as I do. And I think, what gets me super excited is that I think AI is going to be a real game changer for the future of work and the future of learning. And we just are thinking very deeply about how this new technology can really, really help businesses and knowledge creators run these communities and learning programs by taking away a lot of that heavy work, right? That just makes it really difficult to do phenomenal things. So, my vision, and we all know this actually today, the best way to learn is with a tutor. I don't know if you know that, but the evidence-based research is there is nothing better than personalized instruction. And the reason it's so good is because you can ask a tutor questions and they can give you direct feedback, right? It's and up until this moment, it's been very, very hard to scale that model. And so I think a huge part of this next shift in both community management and learning is having AI that understands your tasks that need to be done, but also understands your users or your members, and also understands the IP that you're sort of leveraging from. And so I just think there's going to be so much innovation and so much more value offered in these communities by joining them, because we can access it now in ways that are scalable. Before, it was very, very time consuming to find the right connections in the community or to find the right piece of IP or knowledge to answer that question. And now we have this really interesting tool that I think about much more as augmenting human connection and intelligence versus replacing it. So that's kind of how we look at that in Disco, is how do we use AI to augment human intelligence and to augment connections?
It's fascinating. As Elena said, I'm very, very excited. And you also said the words curiosity, creativity, agency, critical thinking. I imagine I'm sure all of us had this traditional education where we were told this is the way it is, and this is how you should think, and this is what you will apply. And no, we know that doesn't work anymore. we have to learn. We're having this conversation. Obviously, we are aware of it, and I'm sure you have seen a million different communities. You've built some, you have seen people build communities through disco. What do you think makes a successful learning community?
Absolutely. So I think first and foremost, building communities are not easy. And I know I don't need to tell that to you too, because you've built some amazing communities. But when they're done right, they're pretty magical. So I think the first, part of building communities is really understanding what is the behavior that you want in this community, right? Like, what is a successful experience for the different stakeholders of that community? And I think you need to be like really thoughtful around understanding that different stakeholders may be looking for different things too from a community. So one of the big features in Disco that we built is something called like member onboarding that a lot of community platforms don't actually have. And the idea of member onboarding is like, listen, the more we understand who you are and what your hopes, dreams, and goals are, and also what your contributions can be to this community, and also what your background is, whether it's, like me, I'm a SaaS ed tech founder based in Toronto as the highest level, but the more we understand about you, the more we can start to design and create programs and connections and content that is able to deliver what you're looking for. So I think first off is like understanding what people want. The second part about communities is communities just don't happen on their own. So I think there's this belief that it's like, I'm just going to bring all these people together and I'm going to invite the right people, and then like magic's just going to happen in that place. And it's one of the things I always say, it's like inviting a bunch of people into your house, but at like random times while some people are sleeping and while like nothing's going on. It's like we're disco. So we often talk about like, you need, we have a lot of jokes about like, the party and like not going to the party after it's like died or too early or whatever it is. But the best parties, right, if you think about it, or the best house experiences are because there's rituals, right? I know what is expected of me. I know what is going on. I have some form of programming that makes sense, and I understand that value exchange in that time. And it's a ritual. It's not just a one and done. I think what happens for a lot of communities is they don't think deeply enough about the programming of the community and about habit building and about rituals. And, I think about the different levers you have in a community. You can program content. You can program like deeper experiences, right? Like workshops or learning programs. Mm-hmm. You can program connections. You can program practices or prompts, but they're elements of programming. They don't just happen by themselves. The third piece is communities don't scale like linearly. So what happens is that, the community works in its first incarnation when there's 20 people, right? Or 18 people is a magical number in communities. But after that, people assume that the way they designed their community for the first cohort or group of people, they can just keep adding people and they'll still get that magical experience. Well, the reality of communities are they're actually magnets to attract like-minded people, but the value of the community comes in small groups. So one of like the big differentiators of Disco is how thoughtful we've been about subgroups and sub-community management in communities. So we believe very, very deeply, our point of view is like, if you're trying to build a community of connection. There's different forms of community, so I just want to be mindful of that. It's a really great idea to have smaller groups and to have, whether it's circles or masterminds or councils or however you want to define it, but you need to have deep touch points with smaller groups of people, with management of those groups, right? Whether you call it like a moderator or a leader of like a smaller group, it's just really, really helpful to build that relationship in smaller forms. And I think also making sure that you allow people to have the to have space to contribute. You know, it's interesting. We often think about like, what am I giving people? And it's actually sometimes like, how am I allowing others to give in these communities? And what we found about communities is that really the best way to grow a community is to have super, super engaged users who grow the community for you and with you. Mm-hmm. And if you do that well, like it's a no-brainer, right? Because it's like, it's through people's lived experience that they will recommend your community to others. So I'll stop there because I could go on for a while, but hopefully that's a few learnings.
Yeah, and very interesting that what keeps coming up in our conversations in this podcast is that community builders keep saying, well, when your community members keep inviting their friends and recommending you because they are building with you, right? That's the best case scenario. Because growth, as you said, you can't have 1 million people and they're all excited in their smaller groups. So growth is perhaps not the most important thing, but rather the value that people get in those communities.
Yeah, and members onboarding, you know, this reminded me about like, I usually can think about community building as a product building. Like you basically build your own product as a community. So your community is your product. And then the best way to build product is with customers. So basically co-creating together with your community members, then speaking with the customers. Yeah, members onboarding is also very important in the product, but in the community the same. So there are so many similarities how you approach community building and product building.
Aligned they are, right? And I think like great products, like really, really great products, solve a need for people, right? Like ultimately that's what you're doing, is you're solving something. And so thinking about your community being in service of what your members are looking for is such an important element, and making sure that you are putting the right, you know, programming in front of the right people and connecting them with the right subgroups of people is like magical. A lot of communities today are glorified audiences, right? They're not actually a community. They're, you know, taking a media model and trying to apply it to like a very different intention.
I agree. I recently thought about LinkedIn. Is it a community? No. It's a media platform, I don't know, self-promotion, something, I don't know, lead generation.
This word gets thrown around a lot. It's like on Instagram, oh, you know, all my followers are my community. Or probably not, if we really think about it. So it is definitely, this distinction is important to make.
Definitely. And I think, you know, I know you guys were at Miro and community was super important in your growth, right? And so what we get excited about, like we're seeing a lot of really interesting, intelligent product companies who are starting to recognize that, like, if I actually, like the tool at Miro was a broader, like you were playing into something much bigger, right? Which I think in every tool, right, you're solving a big problem for people. And that problem is bigger than the tool itself. And so if you can sort of align what problem you're solving with a community that is equally as passionate and engaged around solving that problem. And then you can align your incentive structures and your tools. That's really, really powerful, right? For how that community can help your product grow and how your product can help the community grow. And so like, I think a lot about like win-win systems in life, right? So I'm actually in the middle of reading the book, Finite and Infinite Games. I don't know if you've read that by James Sparks. Super nerdy, philosophical book. But a big part of it is looking for these win-win situations where it's a symbiotic relationship that is generative, right? And a lot of people look for this like, winner takes all like opportunity. And I actually think like community-led and product-led overlaid on top of each other for the right companies is incredible. But it has to be done well, and it has to acknowledge, what everybody is looking for. Yes. In the system. But I think it's a really interesting way. I really appreciated the way you framed that.
Just to add to that, my favorite thing building Miro community and working with users was when I could really feel that I brought something valuable to their lives through our collaboration using Miro. Of course, Miro is always involved, but we benefit in any case, right? We benefit, but if they benefit, we benefit double. So that's...
You just hit the nail on the head, which was, when I was at Wattpad, the way we scaled Wattpad, we never sold our platform. We never went, I never went, and I was responsible for all of business for Wattpad. And it was our belief that was like, if our customers are successful, we will just be successful. So like the number one thing we wanted to do was find the creators on Wattpad who were starting to see some success and really help them achieve their success. And that in turn would be the flywheel of growth because other creators would want the same success. And so I do think there's like such a good, learning for companies around creating the environments that help customers succeed and having that ethos.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and to wrap it up, just want to ask you a very important question. What do you think is the future of community learning?
I think the future is really bright. I think there is, our vision for Disco is that we empower communities to drive human connection and lifelong learning in a world that needs it more than ever. And what I get really excited about is that there are no shortage of opportunities for communities to create transformative value for people in the world. Like, I actually think, like, if we haven't even touched on this, which is like, most people today are incredibly lonely. Most people today feel really like isolated. And so while I think AI is going to have a huge impact unto itself around what opportunities it gives for people to learn, I think where I get very excited for communities is that the AI, like a world in which AI is prevalent, actually is going to create more scarcity for human connection and therefore more value in communities that are offering human connection and learning opportunities. So it sounds like a little bit roundabout, but I'm a big believer in, like, whenever there is a swing one way, there is a massive swing the other way. So if you look at like the attention economy and mindfulness, right? Well, it's because everybody's attention got stolen that mindfulness has become such a huge opportunity. So if you think about like the AI proliferation of content, I actually think like it's actually going to have a swing to people needing and wanting more human connection and learning opportunities in a world that is changing so fast. And what's so great is that the AI is just going to get better and better at serving these knowledgepreneurs and businesses who it just was so much work to run all the programming and the member engagement before. So now you can do it in a much more scalable way. And, I see a world too where there's new, even like knowledge AI products that you can offer your community, or concierge services or personalized programs that you can offer to have an even better experience as a member or learner in these communities. So I'm very, very bullish on the future of communities and learning. And that's what we're, we're mission-driven entrepreneurs. We're here for the next 2 decades to keep going on making Disco the platform for you to truly unlock lifelong learning and human connection for the community of your choice.
The future looks really bright. Candice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As you said in the beginning, you are disrupting innovation. So please continue doing so, and we will keep looking at what you're doing and following, and hopefully chatting.
I would love to work with you guys. I think you're doing amazing stuff.
Thank you so much for this human connection today.
Yes, thank you so much. It's lovely. Absolutely lovely.
Thanks.
All right. We'll see you very soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. If our conversation resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Your ratings and reviews are invaluable in helping us reach more like-minded people. You can find all our episodes and learn more about the show at communityunlocked.substack.com. See you in the next episode.